When Europe was stuck in its dark age, the Islamic world stood at the pinnacle of human civilization for centuries, pioneering innovations that helped shape the modern world as we know it. Muslim scholars in Baghdad, Cordoba, and Cairo built grand libraries where they preserved and expanded upon Greek, Persian, and Indian knowledge. Al-Khwarizmi laid the foundations of algebra, while Ibn Sina's canon of medicine became the definitive medical text for centuries. Muslim astronomers like al-Battani refined planetary models, and engineers like al-Jazari created early automation, designing intricate water clocks and even a rudimentary programmable robot. Islamic cities like Baghdad, Damascus, and Cordoba were some of the most advanced ones in the world, with streetlights, hospitals, running water, and universities long before their European counterparts. The Islamic world controlled trade routes from Spain to China, and they invented some of the first forms of paper money, checks, and joint stock partnerships, centuries before these concepts were introduced to Europe. It was a world where scientific inquiry, cultural tolerance, and economic dynamism thrived, until the tides of history began to shift. Today, Muslim countries like Afghanistan, Yemen, Sudan, Pakistan, and Syria are some of the poorest countries in the world. In numbers, the Muslim population comprises 19% of the world, but only contributes to 6% of the world's gross domestic product. In this video, we'll analyze what are some of the causes of this peculiar issue. But before we dive in, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on deep dives into history, economics, and the forces that shape our world. Your support helps us bring more thought-provoking content like this. Let's get started. What happened between the 10th and 16th centuries? After the 11th century, the Abbasid Caliphate lost direct control over much of the Islamic world, and regional powers like the Fatimid, Seljuks, and later Mongols emerged and took control of different parts of the once grand empire. Without a centralized authority, trust in financial institutions declined. Unlike China, which had a single authority managing paper money, the Islamic world had competing rulers who lacked coordination. To make things worse, the Mongols sacked Baghdad, the most important economic center of the time, in 1258, and this was a significant blow to the banking and economic infrastructure of the region. With key trade hubs devastated, the sophisticated banking systems collapsed, and gold and silver became the dominant currencies again. Rulers became defensive and inward-looking, while scholars began restricting financial practices they deemed too risky or speculative. Many scholars argued that checks could resemble riba if interest was involved, discouraging its use. So, the Islamic world completely abandoned its once revolutionary financial innovations, while Italian and Dutch banks in the 14th to 17th centuries expanded on these ideas, creating more robust credit and banking systems, and allowing European maritime trade to flourish and economic power to shift westward. Why did Europe boom while the Muslim world stagnated? During the Islamic Golden Age, the Silk Road trade, the Indian Ocean commerce, and Mediterranean connections were dominated by the Arabic empires. At the time, Europe was divided into many small states that were no match for the large Islamic empires. However, this competition among the smaller kingdoms drove technological and political innovation. When one country advanced, others copied it. The Islamic world, in contrast, saw large centralized empires, Ottoman, Safavid, Mughal, which were initially strong but became bureaucratic and resistant to change. By 1498, Vasco da Gama reached India by sea, bypassing Muslim middlemen. The discovery of America created new global trade routes and further enriched European kingdoms. This paved the way for Europe's golden era of enlightenment, and later, the Industrial Revolution. At the same time, the Islamic world was becoming more and more conservative, with rulers fearing that new ideas could challenge their authority. Reluctance to financial innovation. One of the most critical factors behind the economic stagnation of the Islamic world was its reluctance to embrace financial innovation. particularly in banking, credit systems, and investment structures. While medieval Islamic finance was advanced, the failure to modernize and keep pace with the West left businesses at a severe disadvantage compared to Europe. By the 17th century, Italian, Dutch, and English banks had developed capital markets, credit systems, and central banking structures. The Islamic world lagged behind. Large-scale banking institutions did not emerge until the second half of the 19th century. The Ottoman Empire, Persia, and Mughal India lacked the financial infrastructure needed for industrial growth. In Europe, banks provided loans to businesses, helping them scale up into large corporations. In the Islamic world, businesses remained small because banks were officially banned from charging interest, leaving many businesses to fund operations with personal savings or family money, which limited growth, and the lack of corporate structures made it harder to pool resources and finance large ventures. Even though interest was officially banned, workarounds, such as profit-sharing agreements, meant companies in the Islamic world often paid far higher rates than their European counterparts. So, in Europe, companies could borrow at around 5% interest, while in the Islamic world, alternative financing methods often resulted in effective interest rates of 15% or more. The final result was fewer large companies, factories, or global trading empires originating from the Islamic world. The Islamic inheritance laws. In many European countries, the practice of passing wealth and land to the eldest son was common, especially among the nobility. This allowed family wealth to remain intact across generations and create a foundation for estates, businesses, and financial empires to grow over time. Islamic inheritance law, on the other hand, mandated the equal division of wealth among all heirs: sons, daughters, wives, siblings, and even distant relatives. Polygamy further exacerbated this issue. A wealthy businessman with multiple wives and many children would see his fortune diluted among dozens of heirs. Because of this, wealth rarely accumulated in a way that could fund industrial-scale enterprises. In Europe, family businesses could survive multiple generations, turning into powerful financial dynasties. In the Islamic world, when a businessman died, his company often died with him. The business itself was often dissolved because no single heir could take over as the sole owner. The heirs would have to start over from scratch, using much smaller individual portions of their father's capital, which is why businesses rarely, if ever, reached a scale comparable to European trading firms and industrial companies. Europe's early capital accumulation allowed banks, stock markets, and large corporations to develop. Industrialization required massive investments, which were made possible by wealth concentration and long-term financial institutions. The Islamic world struggled to build financial institutions because there were no large intergenerational businesses that required them. Without large businesses, there was little need for banks, corporate structures, or stock exchanges, further deepening the financial gap between Europe and the Muslim world. The corrupt legal system. Another major reason for the economic divergence between Europe and the Islamic world was the legal system governing commerce. While Europe developed contract-based commerce with enforceable written agreements as early as the 14th century, the Islamic world remained reliant on oral testimony and religious courts. Even as late as the 18th century in Istanbul, the most advanced Muslim city at the time, only 3% of trials relied on written contracts as evidence. In most other cases, oral testimony was still deemed more important. This meant that commercial disputes were settled based on witnesses rather than signed agreements, which was obviously very unattractive for potential investors. In Europe, on the other hand, by the 1400s, written contracts became essential for commercial disputes. Courts started enforcing long-term agreements, enabling businesses to plan and invest for the future. Bills of exchange, a financial instrument that allowed merchants to transfer money safely over long distances, were legally enforceable, which further boosted trade and investment. The predictability of contract law allowed businesses to take larger risks, grow, and accumulate more capital over time, widening the gap between Europe and the Islamic world even more. But why didn't they just copy European businesses? The short answer is that bureaucracy started to outweigh entrepreneurship, and every time that happens, this is the beginning of the end for all great empires. But let's analyze, why did this happen in the Islamic world? A series of famines, pandemics, and wars led many people to move away from large cities to rural areas where food was available. The weakening of centralized state control meant that local feudal rulers gained more power. Commerce in the large cities started declining, and religious leaders and scholars were focused solely on keeping their power. This shift toward bureaucracy meant that ambition was increasingly focused on political closeness rather than economic or technological innovation, which was often seen as a threat by Islamic leaders. In contrast, Europe's merchant class kept growing and becoming more powerful and pushing for business-friendly policies and financial innovations. In most civilizations, as societies transition from tribalism to structured governance, religion plays a central role in shaping institutions. Medieval Islam was no different. Religion became deeply intertwined with law, governance, and daily life. Unlike Europe, where Christianity entered an already established political and philosophical framework consisting of Roman law, Greek philosophy, and pre-existing political institutions, Islam emerged alongside the state itself, making the two inseparable. As a result, secular governance never fully developed, and religious leaders held significant control over economic and business activities. So, when Europe was going through the Reformation, Enlightenment, and Industrial Revolution, in the Islamic world, religious leaders remained integrated into governance and resisted changes that threatened their influence. Many business and financial innovations from Europe were seen as threats, leading to their rejection or slow adoption. And nothing shows this better than the invention of the printing press. The printing press was invented in 1440 by Johannes Gutenberg, and within 50 years, more books were printed than in all of human history combined. In Europe, it led to an explosion of literacy, scientific progress, and economic innovation. In the Islamic world, however, the printing press was banned for centuries. Religious leaders feared that the printed word would weaken their authority, as books could now be read without religious scholars interpreting them. In their minds, the monopoly on knowledge transmission, previously controlled by religious institutions, would be broken. In the Ottoman Empire, the use of the printing press in Arabic script was prohibited until the 18th century. As a result, Turkey, the most advanced Muslim country, only reached the literacy rate of the 15th century Netherlands in the 1960s. Conclusion: what we can learn from the story of the Islamic world is that success breeds complacency, and complacency breeds failure. Comfort is the enemy of progress, and bureaucracy often leads to the death of even the greatest empires. Religion has played a dual role in the history of the Islamic world. It was once a catalyst for progress, but later became a barrier to innovation. Unlike in Europe, where secular institutions gradually gained independence from religious authority, the Islamic world's political and economic institutions remained deeply intertwined with religious structures. This had profound consequences for legal systems, education, science, commerce, critical thinking, and the overall progress of society. The only way for nations to thrive is to embrace economic dynamism, financial innovation, and intellectual openness. Those that resist change and cling to outdated institutions eventually fall behind and struggle, often for centuries, regardless of how mighty they once were.